all kinds of speech activity that change the articulation. I also identify the change on the articulation by physical action, like delivery good, making payment, and so forth. I also identify control principle for the occurrence of the natural event, like in certain event that trigger an insurance obligation and so forth. So the result of that is a set of 10 control principles, and this is an example of the control principle. The list of the detailed control principles are in the dissertation, and I don't want to read out more detail like that. But the key thing, this set of control principles try to explicate the relationship between the deontic reality and documentary reality. This is, represent, the principle represent an initial formal theory on the relationship between deontic reality and documentary reality. In other words, it's trying to explain why a document is needed, why an activity in a documentary procedure is needed. And if we map this kind of thing to the organizational or managerial theory, and you will see, in management, there are two essential mechanisms to govern interorganizational transaction. These mechanisms are contract and procedure. And this, the set of principles also have to explain, if you replace here by the contract mechanism, and if you replace here by the procedural mechanism, and map to management theory, then the set of principles will have to explicate the relationship between the two essential mechanisms that govern interorganizational transaction, which is contract and procedure. Then, for each of the control principles, I will formulate in one or more control rules, and the result of that is 30 control rules. And in chapter 6, you will see again a chapter with length of notation. That is a chapter about the formal representation of control rules. In general, the control rule is in the symbol form of P implied Q, where P is the front indicator and Q is the control requirement. The front indicator here is represented as a formula of temporal logic. More specifically, it is in the form of a branching time temporal logic called the permutation tree logic, the CTL. And the control requirement here is a control obligation, as I explained before, including the control activity, the agent that performs the activity, and the temporal position in the procedure, before certain activity or after certain activity or at the same time and so on. Here, for instance, it's before doing something. And this is one of the implementation. This is the formal representation. This is the implementation in prologue. You see here is very nice. The nice thing here is that nearly there are no major change in the formal representation and the workable implementation.
Executable.
The executable. So the main function, one of the principal functions of the formalization is whether it's implementable or executable. We can provide a beautiful mathematical method. However, it doesn't work in computing system. It's useless. So the thing here is try to balance between the theoretical rigor of the implementation, between in temporal logic, deontic logic, and so forth, and the practicabilities or implementabilities of the formalism. You see here, the difference here is maybe slightly different, mainly due to the set of notation allowed by the formalism and the set of notation allowed by the prologue in specific.
I have a quick question here. And so, what is that expression? Is that Q or?
Yeah, the Q is here. You can consider the Q is here. But before this one is the P.
So
the P. Before this one is P, and from here this is obligation. This is Q.
Okay. So let me see. Okay. And then all those R for what are those?
This is the role. This is the role. For instance, if you look at the control rule here, you may see the way to read the rule. Informally, it's written that if role S claim role R for performing an obligation. Then, before performing the obligation, role R should check the correlating rights of role S. The correlating rights of role S, that means the obligation on role R. There is a correlating relationship between an obligation and a right. Right? This is the informal reading. And this is the form of representation. Okay. If there is a state, every form of representation here is referred to the initial stage of the system. So we can read that the initial state, if there exists, E that means exist, F that means a future. If there exists a future state in which error has an obligation to S, that error will perform alpha.
No, I know that the EF basically temporal logic operator. What is O?
O is the obligation, is the model operator of an obligation. It's defined.
Yeah. So now you're mixing several logics together. What's the semantics?
That's the main thing. That's the main thing. Is the multimodal logic, and the semantic of these. All of the notation here has been defined in chapter 4 of the dissertation. What is the semantic of E, F, O, and the DON, even the DON operator, the claim, and so forth, has been defined in the dissertation.
That's where we're coming back to this is the link. Now, what I mentioned about transition system semantics to modal logics. And then it's not a big leap from transition systems to Petronics.
Yeah, that's there basically.
That's what
But
we're doing here.
actually, transition system is not necessary for modal logic. It's for tense logic. It's basically temporal logic.
Transition systems can serve as the formal semantics for any kind of modal logic.
Yes. Temporal logic is one kind of logic that indicates change by time. Change by the sequence.
The order,
there is other kind of logic. Like, for instance, in Deontic logic, the change here is what they call is about the current word and what they call the expected word. The current word and the expected word. There's also a change.
Yeah, there you have state transition. So
That's
you have
right.
a next, right? So
Right,
that's
right.
tense logic, that's temporal.
Right.
But if you say it's necessary, and so
See, transition systems.
how do you
is-
associate
is-
with that?
Because it's a mapping, and the transition is not necessarily a temporal mapping.
Right.
It's a transition between possible worlds or states. So the modal logics to
Right.
say something is possible from a state, that means you can transition to another state. And if it's necessary, that means you can transition to all the other states.
Right, right. Then when you combine these,
You have
I
different
mean-
kinds of transitions. That's where the different modalities amount to different kinds of transitions.
okay. So basically, okay, I need to take a look at it.
Yeah,
This is the
Yeah.
main reference here is Van Bentham, the Dutch logician.
Okay. From when?
Hmm?
From recent work?
Yeah, the
Very,
last, the name.
very recent work. In the Handbook of Modal Logic.
The Handbook of Modal Logic is just last year, or 2004, I think.
Okay, there was you know, in the 70s, 80s.
Yeah,
there was,
but he's been around for a long time.
No. That there is handbook. So this is a revision of that, or a new one?
This is the new Handbook of Modal Logic. It's an edited work.
Okay.
You know, modal logicians, a dozen different
Right,
modal
right.
logicians.
Okay.
But you just look on the internet. It's out. Some of the chapters, not all of them.
Mhm.
Some of the chapters are free on the internet.
Okay. So let's give you again the context until now. Here is about the contribution of the field. I explained already the contribution. The first contribution is a formalism. That's for Deontic patronage for modeling the Deontic process. The second is a way or a method to analyze the Deontic process to identify control principles. And the third contribution that I try to explain here is the formalization of the control rules in formal logic. Here, specifically is on the combination of various modal logic, including temporal logic, deontic logic, and the logic of action. And look here, do is the logic of action. And the